Hello everyone and welcome back to Campfire Command. Today's mission is to install a GMRS radio in this 2021 Ram 2500. GMRS radio is a great way to communicate with friends on the trail or to reach out to groups or parties for assistance. This should be a pretty straightforward install, but it's a matter of routing the wires and something that I think just about anybody can do. Let's go ahead and get it done. First things first, we've got the Midland 575 GMRS radio. It's going to need a power cord that's already fused, an antenna cord, an antenna, a mount to mount the antenna to the roof rack, the mic to control the actual unit, and for our install, we're also going to be adding a mic extension. Let's get started. A key part of the installation of the GMRS radio is running the antenna here through the back seat, out the back of the cab, and up onto the roof rack. In order to do that, you would normally have to pull out your back seat. I've already done that because that seat's been removed for me, and I run a platform here of 1/2-inch plywood that just lays across the top, and I've got my fire extinguisher mounted to it. So first things first, to get all this squared away, I'm going to pop this platform out, and then we'll get started on running the cable. My plan here is to pry off the trim piece, work my way around, pop this down, and go out the vent. Now what will be really important when I run the antenna cable is once I get out the vent here, I'm going to want to run a bit of a service loop down outside of the cab. The reason I want to do that is so that if any water drips and follows the line, it'll have a point to fall off before it enters the cab. So I'm going to run a service loop like this and then mount it up on the side, and then it'll ultimately run on top to the roof rack. Well, that took some finesse for sure, but just barely able to get the cable through that open spot. Let's pull the rest of the slack through and then keep working from there. Now I can see that I left some slack in there, and I think I've got more than enough cable to run up to where I want to go. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to zip tie a little bit of pressure here on the cable to hold it in place so that we don't accidentally pull the service loop through when we're doing the other work. So now we got the cable coming out the side, running under this trim piece, and it's just starting to feed out in here. I'm going to continue to tuck it under the carpet, following the other wires all along here. One more adjustment I made was here in the flaps. You can see they're still able to function, but when the cable was running through it, the flap was held open. So took a pair of scissors and just divided the flap right there, so now that it falls on either side of it and operates independently, and it'll keep functioning. I've gotten the antenna wire pulled in from the back, and I've still got a tremendous amount of slack. So rather than routing it across the seat, what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to come up here close to the A-pillar, run across the dash, and then drop down into where the radio is installed. Fortunately, I've got enough length on the antenna to do it. Let's see how it goes. I want to clean up a couple plot lines here from the editing room to get everyone on track on how this project ended up successfully completing in the end. Up until this point, my intention had been to install the head unit for the MX575 into the center console. I removed the center console and I couldn't find a good spot to make it fit. The 275 may fit, but the size of the 575 didn't fit in the configuration for my 5th gen RAM. So what I ended up doing was installing the head unit underneath the steering wheel. That ended up being a much cleaner install and had a shorter line for the antenna and a nice quick path out for the battery for power. So what I'm going to do is cut through all of that footage, and we're going to get right to showing where the radio is underneath the steering wheel and how to wire it out to the battery, and then how we finish the antenna. There's one more piece of the puzzle which I mentioned, is the mic extension. The mic extension I do run to the center console, and I'll show where that ended up, but I wouldn't recommend pulling out the center console just to install the mic extension. The reason I finished it there is because I already had it apart. I would find an easier spot on the dash and go from there. All right, so we've torn apart the whole dash, looking at the best place to hide the radio. Remember, we've got the antenna cable coming in here from the left. And we managed to find under this front piece a good spot for the radio right here. So you can see here's my lighting dials, and then just inside there's enough space to fit the radio on its side like that. Then we're going to run the wires out right back through that hole to get power, which is where the clutch pedal normally would go. All right, so here we are in where the hydraulics would come through for the clutch line. And originally my plan was to wrestle with all of those deep 15mm bolts. And then I realized I could get a drill in there and drill a small pilot hole in the middle. Looks a little off-center because of the camera angle. But by drilling that pilot hole, I'm now going to go out under the hood. Now that we've got the pilot hole drilled through the plate here, I'm going to try something here that is not recommended. Don't try it at home. But I've got my 1 1/8 inch hole saw bit into an 11mm socket, into an extension. And then I've got this kind of bendy extension. I'm going to try it and see how it goes. And I'm just going to run it through this drill. I'm drilling through plastic, so hopefully it doesn't need too much pressure. But I am actually, I think, going to throw a glove on just to help with the friction as I'm pushing this guy in there. And you got to do the whole thing left-handed because that's just the shape of the truck. But yeah, I'm going to get this guy on there, see if I can kind of get it lined up, and then if it's going to work, throw the drill on it, and we'll make it happen. I think I made it through. The hole saw slipped out of the 11mm end, but I think I actually made it through. It felt like it broke. All right, look at that. Yeah, and so like I said, it was a piece of plastic and insulation in there, so the hole saw grabbed it all for me, and now we can get a nice clear path in there to fit the grommet. So what I have here is a firewall grommet. I bought a 2-pack off Amazon. There's some name brand ones you can chase down as well. I'll probably drop a link below to the ones that I bought. But this is an increasing diameter, so you could chop it at whatever size you needed. For this instance, the only wire I'm running through it on this job right now is just power for the radio, which is actually smaller than the end. So once I get it wired through, I'm going to zip tie around there. And I may have to slice it just a little to feed in the connector first, so I can get the connector in there as opposed to disassembling the connector and then all those sort of pieces there. So I'm going to do that work. It'll be a little bit tedious, and then I'm going to feed the firewall boot in from the inside, and so we should have some sort of tail sticking out here into the bay, and we'll go from there. Making progress. There it is with the boot all installed. The wires coming out. I got them running around outside the PDU, and then fused up and connected for now. All right, continuing on with the antenna install. I've got it wired up here and just kind of zip tied in place about to the middle of the mount. The wire fits right underneath in the channels, and I'm actually going to use the provided bracket to mount it right about even with the rib. and it's going to work just about perfect. So first things we're going to do is dry fit it, and then if everything goes well, we'll keep going from there. Now I got the NMO mount in place. Like I said, everything's not quite socked down, but just to get a sense for what it looks for, I'm going to pop the ghost antenna on. Get the M pointing forward. I think we're starting to look pretty good. All right, we've got the whole radio installed now. Antenna's up on the roof. We're wired in under the hood. Now I'm plugged into the center console. Let's power it on and see if it works.
DFW Airport, partly sunny, 90, southeast at 13, gusting to 23.
There it is.
Now let's...
Already picking up the weather channel, so that way we know we've got reception. I'll test transmission later, and I'll make sure that it works with one of my handhelds. But thank you everyone for following along on the install. This has been a really good project. Can't wait to get out on the trail, test it out with some friends, and hope you get out on the trail, have some fun, and install these radios, because it's definitely something you can do.